Hi everyone, good evening. Happy Wine Wednesday here on August, I think it's the 26th. Yes, it's been a long week, so I don't quite know what day it is or what time it is, but it's really happy to be here. I do know it's Wine Wednesday, so I'm really happy to be here with you all, and thank you for joining me again today here at the Hill. We are here at the winery. We have been, if some of you have been following the news, we've had some fires here in the valley and in neighboring counties, but we are all safe. Everybody's accounted for. Our winery's still here. Our vineyards are okay. So we are thankful for all that. We're thankful for all the firefighters, first responders out there aiding and helping us to put out the fires. So we are super, super thankful. So just wanted to start off with that and acknowledge that, because it has been, you can imagine the level of stress that has kind of enveloped everyone, and it has been quite the week. And we had harvest starting in COVID, and now with the fires, it's just taken it to the next level and giving us more challenges and all that good stuff that we got to do together. And we are all in this together. Our community here in the valley, neighboring counties, our staff here, we are all in this, and we're relying on one another, checking in with one another, and it's wonderful. So you get to see all the beauty and all the chaos. So yeah, so I'm really tired, and I hope that I can get through this tonight. We started harvest, which is super exciting. Under the circumstances, not so much. However, we did start this past Monday with our Sauvignon Blanc from Lane, which is our estate Sauv Blanc. Super excited about that. It's our first year. We did a replanting, and so it's our first time getting the fruit from that vineyard, and it does taste delicious, I have to say. We just racked it today, and getting the little yeast in there to have it do its thing. So it's starting there. That vintage 20 is starting to get going for y'all. So it'll be to you soon in about a year, and so that's been really exciting. It was a first for me. It was the first time that I started harvest with. There was 4 of us. There was 5 of us here on the hill, because at the time the winery was in a mandatory evacuation, but we got special permission because the fire was not knocking on our door. It was safe for us to come up. So yeah, 5 of us started. So yeah, and then we had a little rosé. We had a little Merlot come in yesterday for the Rosé of Merlot, if you're familiar with that wine. So those are all started. We have officially begun 2020, and looking forward to maybe getting a little bit of reprieve before we start bringing in some reds. So yeah, so I just thought I'd update you on all that. It's been very exciting, and yeah, we're just happy that we're all safe and that we're just all here. So thank you again for joining me. So tonight is really fun and exciting. I'm happy to do this tasting with y'all, that 2011 and 2015 Reserve Merlot. So I thought it would be really fun to do a little bit of a vertical to showcase the same wine under 2 vintages, and to show the compare and contrast between the two, because there were 2 very different vintages here. And yeah, so we'll get to that. So 2011 was a vintage that was, if you remember, it was a cooler vintage. We had rain. We had, it was a very fast vintage as far as from my perspective of getting all the fruit in, getting the reds in. We started on October 1st. Yep, October 1st we started bringing our first reds in, our Merlot that year, and we were finished in 3 weeks. So it was really fast and furious to get the fruit in, and because with the weather and the conditions of the harvest, it was cooler, and so that's what I have here in my glass here. And one thing I love about the vintage is that the cooler vintage is it's a more of an elegant style, is how I refer to it. When you taste these wines side by side, there's a little bit of a lighter color to it, and it's just got a little bit more finesse. Not more finesse. It's just different. It's like an elegance, a soft texture when we get to tasting it. But that's just what I think of that vintage, and I think that the wines are they're aging beautifully, and it's really fun to see how they evolve. Like, you can anticipate what they're going to be, but you really don't know, right, until you open it up. And So 9 years later, it's really, really tasty. At least I hope you think so. I do. And then we're comparing and contrasting it to the 2015 vintage of the Reserve Merlot, which was the opposite of that, right? It was a drought year, and it was just an earlier vintage, and the fruit was much more, a little bit more concentrated. Without the rain, we had this intensity with the fruit, and it was like the third vintage of drought, so it was really kind of pushing it with the vines, and a dry year, and you just got this beautiful intensity with the fruit. And the fruit just decided it shows itself in a different way than it did in the 11. So that is the fun thing about winemaking, right? Is that we're at the mercy of Mother Nature, right? And so we have to make the best decisions we can to make the best quality wine every vintage, and we do that. And but it's just so fun because the variation, the variability of what Mother Nature gives you from year to year really comes through in the glass, and you'll see those nuances, right? You may see the colors a little lighter in 11 versus the 15 is darker. The tannin structure is a little different. You have a little bit more, a little bit more structure. I feel in the 15 overall, when I'm just thinking generalities for the wines. So I think it's really fun, and it's fun to showcase like how different they are, and then how good they are for their own, in their own way. We are still working, so if you hear any of that knocking upstairs, the lab is actually directly above us here, and so we are cleaning up, and we've been processing grape samples all day, so they are still working, so excuse the noise if you hear occasional knocking. So anyway, so that's one thing I thought would be really fun to showcase here for the Reserve Merlot, is those differences and the nuances. The Reserve Merlot, we make it generally we make it every year, and it's thought to be, kind of the top, just kind of like the top of our Merlot, kind of what we think for, I always like to think of it as just really showing off what the Merlot was for the vintage, and like our favorite lots and our favorite barrels, and putting them together for you. The 2011 is 94% Merlot and 6% Malbec. And one thing also I want to say about 2011 is that Merlot was really, I don't know if you want to call it like the shining star. It's one of the varietals for 2011 that I just think really, it just showed really well for the vintage. Merlot ripens well even in cooler vintages, and you see that in this vintage. And then it was also, for me, when I look back at those 2011 wines, it was a great blender wine too that I used to really, fill in the cracks, so to say, or just to kind of help balance out some of the other varietals when we've made those other wines with the cab. So it was a nice balance to that. But so it's really fun to see that in that cooler vintage, it is 94% Merlot. It really says something about the quality of the Merlot that year. We source the fruit from an Atlas Peak vineyard, and also from our own estate fruit out in Pope Valley. So it's a nice blend. When you have different areas, we've talked about that too in past tastings, is that Merlots grown in different appellations can also act in themselves, that it becomes a blending component as well, instead of maybe taking on another varietal. So really pretty, I think, putting those together for this wine. And then Malbec also from Atlas Peak help really kind of support that cherry note of the Merlot. And then for the 2015, that vintage we started much earlier. We started in August. Actually, we were already going on Merlots right now. For still wine, we started in mid-August, about the 15th. It was warmer, lighter crop that vintage. Stuff ripened up sooner, and it was fast and furious as well, but it did slow down a little bit. But yeah, since there was less crop and the nice warm weather, it just ripened earlier. So, and this wine we have, it's a little bit less Merlot, 83% Merlot, and we have a little bit of Cab Sauv in there, 14%, and then 3% of Cabernet Franc actually. So it's just really fun to see, each year there's little different blending components too that really I look at it as it really highlights the best of what those varietals are giving you. And so as each vintage is different, it gives you those different, I don't know, crayons or whatever. It gives you different things to color it in with, you know. And so that's kind of how I think of it with the different varietals. So, and the Merlot sourcing was different also from here. It was down from more from Oakville versus that Alice Peak and a little bit of our Pope Valley. So that gives it also a different texture as well to the wine. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So, what else can I tell you about this?
I think that's a good segue, at least for now. Jane is asking
how the alcohols are different.
Yeah. How to decide on the blending components. So, like when you said that the sourcing comes from different places, would you guys figure it out in the lab, like taste samples and decide what would go into what, or how does that process work?
How does that work? So, hello, Jane. So for me with blending is it really comes down to, as like right now with harvest starting, you get a sense of what the different lots are going to maybe evolve into, or where you kind of visualize them going, like for the reserved lots. So once you get through maybe 6 months from now, and we sit down and we taste through the entire vintage, really kind of, that's when you really go, okay, this one's going to go, this is deemed for the reserve. And when you then sit down and go, okay, if this is going to be the Merlot, or these are the couple Merlots that we want to go into the reserve, what else, what other wines, whatever varietals would help showcase it in its truest form, to really maintain that varietal correctness that I like to think of that the Merlot is, but then also just to kind of just really highlight it in its best light, you know. So it just varies, and then you just, honestly, you just play with it, right? So you just make an assumption of, say, I won't think, oh, I'm going to start with 90% of Merlot, and then I would maybe add the other varietals, and you just play with it that way. And then yes, we do taste it. I usually not necessarily in the lab, but just we have like a tasting room that we sit in, and we'll make up different blends, and then we'll taste them against one another. We'll even come back to them the next day and think, okay, we like this one. Do we still like it? And just, you know, kind of, I don't know. I always feel like it's like that intuitive, you taste it and you just know that's it. And so I think it comes with practice and time and for the love of the process, right? So that is like the coloring, or that's the creative part of it that I love so much. So yeah, and it's usually me and somebody else, a couple other folks here and then, or we'll call, or I'll play with them depending on how busy everybody else is, and then we'll sit down and go, okay, what do you think? Give me your feedback. So I'm rambling on about the blending, but that's kind of how it is. It's just, you just kind of, you kind of know.
That's great.
Yep. So another thing I wanted to mention, getting back to the two vintages too, a difference that you'll taste if you happen to have both of them open, is that there is a difference with the cooler vintage, is that the sugars weren't as high. It's a lower alcohol too than the 15, which was riper and a little bit more alcohol. So that's just a different, again, to the style, test of the style, and to how the vintage was. So shall we taste? Rambling on. Both wines were aged. We do treat them very similarly with the oak profiles of the wine. So they were both in new oak for about 20 months. The 11 was a little shorter, a little less than 20, and then the 15 was a little longer. We do French oak. It was about probably 60% new oak, 60 to 75%, and we would just taste it. I believe that 11 had a little bit less, perhaps, so we were just kind of monitoring it. We may have dialed it down a little bit on one of the rackings, but this one, it's really, I think this, I didn't decant anything tonight, but I think it would warrant to really open it up and have it show its best foot forward here. It's going to evolve and change a lot. You get a lot of that bottle or aged aroma in there, but it's really open. It's changed since I reported about 20 minutes ago. I just feel like it's so pretty. Like, that's what I think of when I smell this wine. It shows how pretty Merlot can be, and just there's the red fruit that you'd expect from a Merlot. And I almost get like, it's changed because when we first made it, I would have called it more like there was a little bit of like a savory note, like maybe a little hint of thyme. But today I'm almost getting something a little bit floral. It's pretty. Just that's what it's pretty. I think it's just like delicate and it's refrained. You know, it coats your whole palate and it just kind of dances there. It's just really. I think it's very lovely. I really love this wine. Sorry, I keep saying the same thing, but it's just I'm just in awe of how the wines are aging and just how they taste, and I just think it's a great showcase of it. It's just a little bit more of a delicate Merlot than maybe you would have expected when you hear Reserve Merlot. I think we expect it to be the big structured wine, and it shows that delicateness of the vintage. So yeah. And then when you compare it to this one has much more, a little bit stronger aroma. I feel like there's even like a little more boysenberry, so a little bit how Merlot can showcase in a little bit of a darker fruit style sometimes. And that could also be with the Cab Sauv added in there too. It's kind of highlighting that attribute of the Merlot. And it has a little bit of the Cab Franc gives it a little bit of a floral hint as well. But for me, I get more of the dark. When I smell them side by side, this one is more of that red fruit, red cherry. And this one is I do get a little bit of the savory herb in there maybe. But it's still got floral. Yeah, and this one is much more dark, boysenberry, kind of in your face. It's kind of it's being very showy today. Maybe a little barrel notes in there too. Nutmeg. It smells good. They both smell good. Give me a second. So this one, if you taste it, it's a little bit has a little more layers. So I think that shows a little bit more complexity than the 11. And a little bit more spice on it as well. But yeah, it does. It just the tannin structure is a little bit. It's turned up the volume on this one, along with the fruit, and it showcases and hangs out there in a different way than the 11. But I love the 11 too. So it's just they show different ways. I think people, if they, folks that I hear folks say that too about like Merlot, like a Cab, drinks like a Cab sometimes. I feel like this would be more in that direction, but it's not overly tannic. It's still very balanced and just has a little bit more volume turned up, I feel like, on some of the other attributes that you think about when you're drinking the wine.
So Glenn is asking, like, the difference in taste between the two. How much do you attribute it to, like, age, where they're at in their aging process, or the blend, or other factors? So they're both amazing.
They're both amazing. I feel like, well, yes, to your point, I think the blend does change it a little bit because you have, like I was mentioning, the Cab and the Cab Franc. I feel like for me, when I look at these wines and taste these wines, it's really attributed to the vintage and just kind of what that growing cycle was and what these are the fruits of the labor of that vintage. So for me, I attribute it to the weather, and I feel like we treated them very similarly as far as wine production goes. We do adjust things, right, based on how the vintages and circumstances. They both saw quite a bit of skin contact time. We like to leave it on the skins to really pull out as much good stuff as we can. Most years, and some years we change it too. And so I don't know. I feel like for me, it's more attributed to the vintage. If I was to look at the big picture of it.
And Amy is asking if you could explain Cask Reserve as opposed to other casks, and she says it's very smooth for a Merlot.
Oh, thanks. Well, I think that that's a creative name that we've used for the Cask Reserve. It was at one point referred to as a Reserve Merlot, and Cask Reserve just maybe referring to the fact that as we kind of pull, like as I mentioned earlier, like your favorite casks or barrels, it's just another term for barrel. So it's kind of like you're just picking and choosing for this wine, and we make a small volume of it. So I think that's where the name comes from.
And then from earlier when you were talking about the blending decisions, two questions. One from Tim on how many other people are in the room. And said he knows you're the boss, but what other decision makers are there? And then Jane is asking if outside of our own staff, do we ever do any testing with focus groups, which I thought was an interesting question.
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I don't know. Getting to the blending, yes. Each year has been a little bit different. There'll be myself, assistant winemaker, enologist. We've done blends too with the Trolatos as well. So that's been part of the blending process. And then in other years, it will start off like that, and then it kind of dials down where then some days I'm in there just blending, and like I said, then pulling folks in afterwards, and then we talk about multiple blends and do we like the direction that they're going. So it can be from 1 to say 5 people some years. And then the other question was about focus groups.
Yeah, which I think is cool to think. I mean, the answer is no. Like, we don't outsource, any opinion. So it's really cool to think about that. Like, such a small group of people makes the decision.
Yeah. I mean, I've been known to pull in like Anna, like wine club member, manager, and other folks to kind of taste, to say, hey, does this taste like what you think of this wine, or the retail managers too, because I think it's really important to get that perspective. And also, just so you folks know, is that I also ask, like, what are folks liking? What are the wine club members? What are they asking for? Take all that into consideration too when we sit down and blend and show the wine. So it's not in a total bubble. We do get some feedback too, because I don't want to create something that is not going to be well received. So.
Mandy asked a question at the beginning about food pairing recommendations. Do you have different ones for either, or the same?
That's a good one. Food pairings. I didn't even think about that tonight, Mandy. I would say that I think that the 2011 would be really great for, like, if you're having pasta dishes, like, and maybe pair it more that direction, Italian food. That's what comes to mind first for me. The 2015, I think, for those who really love, maybe the meat lovers out there love some, steak, or, I think it'd pair really nice with a nice steak and whatever genre you like to cook it in, some grilled something, whatever you like. So that's what comes to mind for me. Short ribs, I could see this one with the 15, and comfort foods, or stew. I don't know. I love harvest. I love that time of year, how we go into fall, and so then it gets me thinking. Even though we're in this like warm, it's still summertime. I'm already like, oh, it's gonna be fall soon, and all the fall foods, the fall colors and all that good stuff. So starting to think about that, like what you can make in your, growing up for me was, the crock pots, but now we've got Instapots and all those other things we can do. So,
Elizabeth asks, what do you prefer, Merlot in a warm year, or a Merlot in a cool year, or a Merlot grown in cooler versus warmer sites?
Wow, that's nice. Nice question. I love Merlot grown everywhere. I don't know. I would say that I do appreciate Merlot in cooler vintages. I think that it really can hold the vintage. I do like my Merlots ripe Merlots, but I don't like them to be overly, I don't know, I kind of would like to be in the middle. How's that? But I do like the cooler vintage Merlots. I wouldn't categorize all of our sourcing from particularly cool sites in Napa, although the Alice Peak can be pretty cool up there too. So I don't know. I like them all. I'm not answering the question. Sorry, Elizabeth.
Fair enough. Michael asked earlier, do you notice a difference in tasting out of stemless versus stem glassware? Do you have a preference for when you're in the lab, or?
Well, this is kind of our standard glass that we use when we're at the winery. So it really kind of keeps it even keeled for everything. So you're tasting all out of the same glasses. We do not use the stemless here. At home, I have a few that I use, but yeah, I would say if you had this glass as a stemless, it'd probably come across the same way.
So we probably have time for just one or two more questions, but I have a question.
Okay.
So in terms of approaching blending versus single varietal wines, what would you say the difference is? Does one come easier to you naturally, or?
Depends on the wine. Well, I would say that with blends, like when you're making, let's look at the reality is this. Both of these are technically blends because it's not 100% Merlot, right? So to be a Merlot, it needs to be 85% Merlot. That's wrong on here. No, not 85%, 75%. 85% to be Napa Valley. When I think about doing like red blends where it's more like Winemaker's Blend or some of the other wines, Proprietor's Blends that we do, Cuvée 5, there's a little bit more leeway, like creatively, like it doesn't have to be 75% one varietal. So I think that is really fun from a creative aspect to make and to blend. To do varietal wines, I don't feel like it's harder. It's just that you're definitely more focused on your selection. You know what I mean? And so I think the beauty in when you're making like Cask Merlot or you're making any other of the Merlot focused wines, Oakville, Alice Peak, is that you're really focusing on the Merlot from that maybe specific vineyard or that specific area that you then get creative with how you pull the different lots maybe together, like how, maybe we do some barrel ferment, maybe we do some extended maceration here, but we press this one early. And so that kind of gives you the creative way to blend things to really create what your vision is for the wine. So,
cool.
Yeah. I love blending. I just like blending and making wine in general. So it doesn't matter if it's a blend or varietal.
Okay. I like Pam's question, so let's end on this question and then we can wrap up. But she says, many Merlots have become mediocre. How has Rutherford Hill avoided that? How have we made our Merlot shine?
Wow. Thank you. I just think, it goes back to, I feel like we're very lucky with the Terlato ownership of the winery and it really staying true to quality and just staying true to the wines and to the varieties. So we have that support to continue to drive that forward, to not make shortcuts. So I would attribute it to the Terlatos. And so with that, I'm going to wrap it up and say thank you again for joining me, and cheers to you, cheers to Harvest, and just want to do a toast to all those firefighters and the first responders out there helping, keeping us safe and putting those fires out. So ching ching, and cheers to you, and I hope to see you next time. Stay safe and healthy.